We have this natural tendency to worry about negative things. It goes back to our primal nature and the way we've just evolved as a society. Those who worried about gathering food, having warm clothes, and some kind of shelter were the ones who survived a lot of the time. So that's probably why we struggle the most with things that affect our most basic needs. Losing a job, getting evicted, or not having enough food or resources. These are some of the biggest stressors that we have. But interestingly enough, the way we think about these bad situations when they happen is what usually dictates how we handle the situation. It's not so much the situation, but how we perceive and think about that situation that can cause the most suffering. I found for myself that I've been through so many traumatic things in my life that my mind will often go to the worst possible scenario in a given situation. It's almost like my way of preparing for the worst possible outcome mentally in case it actually happens. What I've started to notice is how rare the worst case scenario actually ever happens. I'd be in shock at the end of my life if I added up all of the minutes I've spent worrying about something that turned out to be just fine. Or how many things do we let just destroy our health, and a month later we can't even remember what we were worried about in the first place. That's been the story of my life, and I'm working really hard on changing this. So how do we know if something is a worthwhile investment to worry about or just our emotions running wild? Well, the first part requires a huge leap of awareness and acceptance to distinguish things that are just out of our control. I guess it comes down to the timeless wisdom of accepting the things that we can't change and the wisdom to know the difference. It's way easier said than done, right? It's really hard or seemingly impossible when we're upset to take a step back and assess the situation with some clarity, especially when we're right in the middle of a symptom or an episode. Something that helps to start changing this whole cycle is to start being aware that we aren't feeling well, realizing that we can't see things clearly at that moment, realizing that it always passes and that we can always readdress what we're worrying about when we're feeling better to see if it's still bothering us. If the same issue is still present when you're completely stable, then it might be worth putting a little more attention into figuring out how to fix the problem. Like I said, when something bad happens to me, my instinct is to prepare for the worst. Something I've been working on is to first just realize that I'm upset before it's gotten so far down the rabbit hole of negative thoughts that I can't pull myself out of that. Then I need to take a step back and ask myself if I have any influence over the situation. If it's out of my control, that's all there is to it. Worrying about things that are out of our control is an illusion. It's no more real than the shadow of a shadow. I might as well be worrying about the weather in another country. Tiny steps of self-awareness start to change the cycle, and we have to be really patient with ourselves when it comes to changing the way we think. It would be like someone trying to change their political or religious views overnight when they've been used to approaching things in a certain way their entire lives. Beliefs that we hold really strongly are hard to let go of, especially beliefs that we have about ourselves. I still often see myself in the mirror as the pudgy kid from 6th grade, even though 25 years later, I look completely different. The challenging part is to take a step back in the heat of the moment and realize that we're getting stuck in a negative thought spiral before it turns into a bad day. I mentioned awareness when it comes to recurring patterns of negative thoughts. When I get upset about something, the first thing that comes to my head, whether it's conscious or subconscious, is usually the same negative statements. It'll be things like, "This always happens to me. This whole week is ruined. I always have the worst luck. My life is horrible. I'm such a loser." Things like that. So what would happen if I slowly worked on changing those statements to something like, "Well, it's been a while since I've had a day this bad, and I'm grateful for that." Or, "I know today isn't good, but according to my mood chart, the rest of the week really wasn't as bad as I thought it was." Or, "I'm lucky to have people who support me during times like this." Or, "I'm being really hard on myself, and that's not fair since the situation is out of my control." Another example would be, "I'm proud of myself that I was even able to realize that my thoughts are really negative right now." So here's what I'd like all of you to try. Just see if the next time you start getting upset or depressed, if you can intercept or realize that you're getting upset in the first place. That alone is huge. See how quickly you were able to realize that the bad thoughts were starting, and how long did it take before you removed yourself from the situation or did something about it? Did it happen after you had a big fight with your spouse, or were you able to realize even for just a few seconds that things are starting to get bad in the heat of the moment? When I first started working on things like this, it was slow and steady progressive change. There were times where I was able to realize that I was extremely upset, and even though I knew I wasn't handling things well, or knew in the back of my head what I probably should do, I was still too far down the rabbit hole to pull myself out. The difference, though, was that I went from having absolutely no awareness of how upset I was behaving to being at least able to acknowledge that I was extremely upset in the heat of the moment. The more I practiced being aware of my emotions, the easier it got to recognize that I was starting to get upset before things got out of control. It didn't happen overnight, but it all started with a simple desire to be more mindful of how I'm feeling. Then I started to notice times where I was able to remove myself or to address the situation a lot faster, and even sometimes prevent a potentially catastrophic episode from affecting everyone around me. As you start to notice your awareness growing, the next step would be realizing that you're engaging in negative self-talk, like telling yourself that you're a loser, a failure, or not good enough, basically anything like that. If you can take just one single negative statement, realize that there isn't any substance or truth behind it, and replace it with something more constructive, that's the next huge achievement. Again, this takes time because we're literally reprogramming the way we react to life. A simple thing that I do to help with my self-image is to put a sticker on my mirrors that says, "What's something you like about yourself?" Every time I used to look in a mirror, the first thing that would come into my mind was critical negative thoughts about myself. I could be in a store and walk by a mirror, and even without realizing it, thoughts like, "You look horrible," or "fat," or "ugly" would be in my head before I even knew it or knew that they were there. I didn't do that when I was 5 years old, so something happened in life in between that time and now that changed the way that I talk to myself. I've practiced looking for something I like about myself for long enough now to where it's actually becoming a habit when I walk by a mirror. We live in such a fast food, instant gratification society that I think it's become harder for people to be patient with themselves when it comes to change. We might tell ourselves that we're willing to change, but I'm not talking about just changing our hairstyle or the clothes we wear. When it comes to changing the way we actually think or respond to things, it takes time. So without some kind of instant gratification, it's harder for people to stick with things like this. So that being said, just pick one small thing at a time. I mean, did it ever work for you when you quit drinking, quit smoking, started a new diet, and went to the gym all at once? That never works very well for me. You don't have to move mountains here. It's just one shovel of dirt at a time. This could be putting your own sticker on your bathroom mirrors, or taking some small aspect of yourself that you'd like to improve. Also, remember to celebrate every single tiny victory. Even if you weren't able to handle a situation in the best way when you were upset, at least if you noticed that you were starting to become more aware of the way that you feel, celebrate and focus on that. Looking at the bigger picture, if you changed one tiny thing about yourself each week, in 1 year's time, you will have changed almost 50 different things or worked on 50 different ways to improve your quality of life. So just imagine how much improvement you could make in the overall way that you feel, with your symptoms, with awareness and everything, in just a year's period of time. Now, I know a year might seem like a lot, but we all know how fast time goes by, and just knowing that we're doing something to change our lives can be really empowering. So the reason why I started making videos was to help as many people as I possibly can to not struggle like I have throughout my life so far. I know it's hard to find really good free mental health resources. So if you get the chance to share what I do here with someone else, it could potentially save a life. To make the biggest difference in my ability to reach more people, there's a link at the top of all my videos where you can join our exclusive Polar Warrior community on Patreon. There are some incredible people there, and it'll give you a direct line of communication to me anytime you need. And there's also a large growing collection of videos that aren't on YouTube, so consider checking that out. A very special thanks to the International Bipolar Foundation for helping my videos reach a larger audience. Take gentle care of yourself this week. Thank you so much for spending this time with me as usual, and we'll see you all back here again soon for the next Polar Warrior video. Stay well.